Rebecca Davis had mastered the art of invisibility at Blackstone Air Force Base. At 34, her auburn hair was pulled back into the tight regulation bun she'd worn for 8 years, a habit dating back to days when loose strands could spell disaster in a cockpit. Her green eyes, once sharp as morning frost, now avoided contact with those who saw her as just another mechanic in faded overalls. The maintenance hangar buzzed with pre-dawn activity when she arrived at 5 a.m., her steel-toed boots echoing on concrete floors that had witnessed decades of military precision. The other mechanics called her the Professor, behind her back, partly for her habit of reading technical manuals during lunch breaks, partly for her uncanny ability to diagnose aircraft problems that stumped senior technicians. What they didn't know was that Rebecca Davis had once been Captain Rebecca Montgomery, the youngest squadron commander in Air Force history. 10 years earlier, she had commanded 6 F-22 Raptors in Operation Desert Shield, leading America's finest pilots on what should have been a routine mission. Instead, it had turned into a nightmare that ended her career and began her exile. The betrayal came from Colonel Vincent Kruger, her mentor and commanding officer. Intelligence had been sold to the highest bidder. Coordinates had leaked to enemy forces. 4 pilots were killed in an ambush that should never have happened. When the smoke cleared and investigations began, fabricated evidence painted Rebecca as a reckless commander who ignored warnings and led her squadron into an obvious trap. The court-martial was swift and merciless. Captain Rebecca Montgomery was stripped of her rank, her wings, and her identity. Only General Thomas Bradley, her former instructor at the academy, believed in her innocence, but his transfer to European command came days before he could intervene. Kruger's network of corrupt officers buried the truth under mountains of falsified evidence. Now, 8 years later, Rebecca existed in the shadow of her former life. Every rivet she checked, every engine she serviced, was both torture and salvation. She was close enough to touch the machines she loved, but forever barred from flying them. She had legally changed her name, dyed her hair, and blended into the mass of maintenance personnel where her true identity remained hidden. The container that served as her living quarters sat in a forgotten corner of the base, between the fuel depot and abandoned storage facilities. Inside, beneath an army cot, was a small metal box containing 3 items: a faded squadron badge, a photograph of her younger self next to her F-22, and a handwritten letter from Lieutenant Marcus Torres, one of the pilots killed under her command, written just hours before the mission that took his life. Captain, the letter read in Marcus's neat handwriting, no matter what happens out there, I want you to know we have the utmost confidence in you. You are the finest pilot we've ever flown with. See you on the other side. Every morning at 4:30 a.m., Rebecca ran the perimeter of the base in darkness. Her feet found the same trail she'd been running for 8 years. The physical pain helped drown out the emotional one, the constant reminder of 4 lives lost and truth buried beneath layers of corruption and lies. During a routine inspection of an engine casing, Chief Master Sergeant Jake Williams approached her with his usual mix of professional respect and easy friendliness. Williams was one of the few on base who treated her as more than just a mechanic, though he couldn't understand why she seemed more knowledgeable about aircraft systems than technicians with twice her experience. "Davis, we have a situation coming up," Williams said, a note of concern in his voice. "Exercise Desert Storm 3 starts next week, and we're short-staffed for servicing the Griffin H-9 helicopters. I'm assigning you to the job." Rebecca's hands froze on the wrench she was holding. The Griffin HX-9, the latest in jet hybrid helicopter technology. A technological marvel that could hover like a hummingbird and zip through the sky at near subsonic speeds. She'd studied every technical manual for the craft, memorized its specs, understood its capabilities better than most pilots who'd flown. "It. Copy that, Sergeant," she said, keeping her voice steady despite the surge of excitement. Flying the Griffin would be the closest she'd gotten to real flying since her exile began. Williams watched her reaction with curiosity. "You seem pretty familiar with the specs already. It takes most technicians weeks to get comfortable with these machines." "I like to stay current on new technology," Rebecca said simply, returning to her work. "You never know when it might come in handy." She neglected to mention she had spent countless off-duty hours studying Griffin systems like a moth drawn to flame. In her dreams, she still flew, not the slow transport helicopters she was forced to service, but advanced fighters and hybrid craft that pushed the boundaries of what was possible. As Williams walked away, Rebecca allowed herself a moment of anticipation. Exercise Desert Storm 3 would bring together elite pilots from across the country to test their skills against the Griffin's capabilities. For 8 years, she had watched from the sidelines as others flew the missions she once commanded. Next week, she would be closer to the action than she'd been since falling from grace. Little did she know that this exercise would be the scene of a confrontation that would shatter her carefully constructed invisibility and force her to choose between the safety of shadows and the dangerous light of truth. The first hook had already been cast, though she wouldn't know it for several days. Captain Derek Harrison, the exercise's flight commander, had already begun joking that the grease monkeys would soon get a chance to see real pilots at work. His casual cruelty would soon escalate into something far more dangerous, a public humiliation that would come back to haunt him in the most unexpected way. As Rebecca packed away her tools and prepared for the long walk back to her container, she had no idea that her past was about to collide with her present in the most public way possible. A ghost in mechanic's overalls was about to learn that some truths refused to stay buried forever. The Desert Storm 3 briefing room buzzed with testosterone and competitive energy as pilots from 5 different bases gathered to review the week's training scenarios. Rebecca stood in the far corner, clipboard in hand, wearing the invisible uniform of support crew, present but unnoticed, essential but unacknowledged. Captain Derek Harrison commanded the room's attention as if he'd been born to it. A Harvard graduate with political connections, he represented everything Rebecca had once fought against in the Air Force, the old boys network that valued family influence over actual skill. His family's connections had fast-tracked him through flight school, and those same connections ensured he'd never face the kind of scrutiny that could end careers. "Gentlemen," Harrison began, his voice carrying the easy arrogance of a man who'd never faced real consequences. "And ladies," he added with a patronizing nod toward Major Jennifer Cross, the only female pilot in the group, "this week we're going to show these Griffin birds what real pilots can do." Rebecca's jaw tightened as she listened to Harrison's dismissive remarks about the maintenance crew. In his world, pilots were warriors, and everyone else was support staff, interchangeable, expendable, and barely worth acknowledging. She'd met his type before. Officers who confused privilege with competence, who mistook political connections for real skill. After the briefing, Rebecca began her inspection of Griffin Alpha 7, the helicopter Harrison would be flying. The hybrid craft was a masterpiece of engineering, with twin turboshaft engines capable of producing over 4,000 horsepower each. As she ran through the pre-flight checklist, her hands moved with unconscious precision, muscle memory from thousands of hours in similar cockpits guiding her movements. "Excuse me, sweetheart," Harrison's voice cut through her concentration, condescending as if he were addressing a child. "I've got a pre-flight inspection to complete, so if you could finish your little check and get out of the way, that'd be great." Rebecca looked up from the engine casing she was inspecting. Her green eyes met his for a moment, then looked back down at her work. "Just finishing up the final systems check, sir." Be ready in 2 minutes. Make it 1 while you're at it, Harrison replied, his voice hardening. I don't have time to wait around while maintenance fiddles with buttons they don't understand. That's the pilot's job. The words hit Rebecca harder than she'd expected. 8 years of hiding hadn't dulled the sting of being dismissed by men who couldn't match her expertise on her worst day in the cockpit. She finished the inspection in silence, gathering her tools while Harrison made exaggerated gestures of impatience. As she walked down the aircraft steps, Harrison called out loudly enough for nearby pilots to hear. Try not to break anything. While I'm gone, dear. These machines are worth more than you'll earn in a lifetime. Laughter rippled through the group of pilots, the easy camaraderie of those who considered themselves superior. Rebecca felt her face flush, but she kept walking, refusing to give them the satisfaction of a reaction. Senior Master Sergeant Williams watched the scene from across the tarmac, anger clouding his features. He'd worked with Rebecca for 3 years and knew she was the most competent technician on his team. Watching Harrison's casual cruelty made his protective instincts flare. Davis, Williams called as Rebecca stowed her equipment. Let's take a walk. They walked away from the aircraft, Williams choosing his words carefully. You don't have to put up with that kind of treatment from anyone. Are you okay? I can file a complaint for unprofessional conduct. Rebecca shook her head quickly. Don't bother, Sergeant. I've heard worse. It's not about that, Williams insisted. Harrison thinks he can treat people like dirt because his dad's a congressman and he's got connections at the Pentagon. Someone needs to knock him down a peg. While they talked, neither noticed Major Cross approaching until she spoke. I couldn't help but overhear. Derek's out of line, but he's also untouchable. Family money, political connections, and just enough competence to avoid being cashiered. I've been trying to put him in his place for 2 years. Williams looked at Cross carefully. Despite being the only woman in the pilot group, she'd earned her position through undeniable skill and tenacity. Her warning about Harrison carried weight. So what are you suggesting? Williams asked. Cross glanced around to ensure they couldn't be overheard. Harrison has one weakness, his ego. He can't resist a challenge, especially if it makes him look good in public. The question is, are you willing to take the risk to exploit it? Rebecca felt a flutter of anticipation, though she couldn't explain why. Something in the Major's tone suggested she had more in mind than just filing complaints through official channels. What kind of risk? Williams asked. Before Cross could respond, the air filled with the sound of rotor blades spinning up. Harrison's Griffin was lifting off for its first training flight. The aircraft rose smoothly, transitioning from helicopter to jet mode with textbook precision. Rebecca watched with professional interest, noting the pilot's technique. It was competent, but not outstanding. He's good, Cross admitted grudgingly. Not great, but good enough to back up most of his talk. The problem is, he's never faced real competition. Rebecca's pulse quickened despite herself. There was something in Cross's voice that spoke of keen understanding of competition dynamics. As Harrison's Griffin disappeared into the distance, Cross turned to the group. The exercise runs 5 days. By the end, either Harrison will have learned some humility, or he'll have proven he's as good as he thinks he is. Either way, it should be interesting to watch. Williams frowned. You're not planning anything that's going to get people in trouble, are you? Cross smiled, but her eyes were steely. Sometimes, Sergeant, the best way to deal with bullies is to give them exactly what they want. As the three of them parted ways, Rebecca felt the familiar sensation of standing at a crossroads. For 8 years, she'd chosen safety over confrontation, invisibility over vindication. But something about Harrison's casual cruelty had stirred feelings she thought were buried forever. That evening, alone in her container, Rebecca opened the metal box beneath her cot and stared at the photograph of her younger self next to an F-22 Raptor. The woman in the picture radiated confidence and determination, qualities that had been stripped away along with her rank and wings. She remembered Lieutenant Torres's letter, his absolute faith in her abilities, and the 4 pilots who had died because of Vincent Kruger's betrayal. Their deaths had haunted her for 8 years, but Harrison's arrogance had awakened something else, an almost forgotten, burning desire to prove that skill and courage mattered more than connections and politics. Rebecca closed the box and tried to sleep, but her dreams were filled with the sound of rotor blades and memories of flying. Tomorrow, Harrison would have new opportunities to display his arrogance, and Rebecca was beginning to suspect that Major Cross was planning something more than just observation. The stage was set for a confrontation that would test everything Rebecca had learned about survival, sacrifice, and the true meaning of courage. But little did she know that the greatest test wouldn't come in defending herself. It would come in revealing to the world the pilot she once was to the very institution that had destroyed her. Day 3 of Exercise Desert Storm brought an unexpected crisis that would change everything. 3 backup pilots simultaneously fell ill after eating together in the base mess hall, leaving the exercise dangerously short-handed. Colonel Marcus Stone, the base commander whose career had been built more on political maneuvering than leadership, saw only trouble where others might have seen opportunity. "This is a disaster," Stone muttered during an emergency briefing. "We've got VIPs coming from the final demonstration, and we're 3 pilots short. The Pentagon will have my head if this exercise fails." Captain Harrison, fresh off a flawless training flight, leaned back with the smirk Rebecca had come to associate with trouble. His successes over the past 2 days had inflated his already substantial ego, and she could see the wheels turning in his mind. "Actually, Colonel," Harrison said, his voice carrying the tone of someone about to tell a joke, "I have a solution that could solve several problems at once." Major Cross, sitting across from him in the briefing room, caught Rebecca's eye as if to say, "Here it comes." Harrison's arrogance had grown with each successful flight over the past 2 days, and his treatment of the ground crew had become increasingly dismissive and cruel. "The maintenance crews have been asking a lot of questions about the Griffin," Harrison continued, his smile widening. "Maybe it's time to give them a real education. Show them why we're so strict about pilot certification." Colonel Stone frowned. "What exactly are you proposing, Captain?" "Put one of the techs in the Griffin for 5 minutes. Let them see what pilots actually deal with. It'll be educational for everyone. They'll understand their place better, and we'll get some good footage for the training archives." Rebecca's stomach nodded. She knew exactly where this was heading, and every instinct screamed at her to find an excuse to be elsewhere. But Senior Master Sergeant Williams had specifically assigned her to attend this briefing, and leaving now would draw unwanted attention. Major Cross leaned forward. "That's actually not a bad idea, Derek. Public education matters. Who did you have in mind?" Harrison's smile turned predatory. His gaze swept the room and settled on Rebecca. "Davis has been asking the most questions about Griffin systems. She seems to think she understands how these machines work. Why not give her a front row seat?" The room fell silent except for the hum of ventilation systems and distant jet engines. Rebecca felt all eyes on her, assessing, judging, already anticipating entertainment at her expense. Her heart pounded in her ears, bringing back memories of courtrooms and humiliation. Colonel Stone studied Rebecca with the calculating air of a man weighing political risks against potential liabilities. "We'll need to make sure she signs all the necessary waivers. Standard safety precautions," Harrison interrupted. 5 minutes. Engine start only. What could go wrong? While Rebecca thought grimly, "I can think of a lot of ways this could backfire, starting with the very real possibility that muscle memory would betray my disguise." 8 years of hiding had taught her self-control, but sitting in a cockpit might trigger reflexes I've suppressed for so long. I don't think that's necessary, she said quietly, hoping to deflect the tension. I'm quite comfortable with my current duties. Harrison's expression hardened. Oh, but I insist. You're so curious about pilot procedures, Davis. Here's your chance to see what you've been missing. Unless you're afraid. The challenge hung in the air like a thrown gauntlet. Rebecca recognized the trap. To refuse would mark her as a coward. To agree would invite public humiliation. Harrison had orchestrated it perfectly. Witnesses, guaranteed audience, maximum embarrassment potential. Suddenly, Major Cross spoke. Up? This could actually be useful for crew resource management training. Understanding each other's roles and challenges improves team effectiveness. Rebecca glanced at Cross, trying to discern whether the Major was helping or making things worse. Cross's expression remained neutral, but there was something deeper in her eyes. A game being played at levels Rebecca couldn't see. Colonel. Stone made his decision with the air of a man eager to pass responsibility elsewhere. Okay, 5 minutes, engine start only, full safety precautions. Williams, see that the technician signs all liability waivers. Harrison, make sure this stays. Educational. When the briefing ended, Rebecca felt trapped in a web of her own choices. Walking away now would raise questions she couldn't answer. Staying would risk exposing everything she'd worked so hard to hide. Williams approached her, his face worried. Davis, you don't have to do this. Harrison's setting you up, and everyone knows it. It's okay, Sergeant, Rebecca replied, though her voice betrayed her internal struggle. 5 minutes in a cockpit won't kill me. But as she signed waiver after waiver, each document was a reminder of how far she'd fallen from her former status. Rebecca couldn't shake the feeling that she was signing away not just legal liability, but 8 years of carefully crafted anonymity. Major Cross lingered after the others had left, pretending to review flight schedules, but keeping a close eye on Rebecca. Once they were alone, she spoke quietly. You know, Davis, I've been watching you work on these machines for the past few days. You understand systems integration better than most pilots. Where did you learn so much about advanced avionics? The question seemed casual, but Rebecca sensed genuine curiosity beneath it, mostly from reading technical manuals. I like to understand what I'm working with. Cross nodded slowly. That's commendable dedication. Most technicians only focus on their specific systems. You seem to have a broader grasp of the big picture. There was something in Cross's voice that made Rebecca wonder if the Major suspected more than she was letting on. But before she could analyze it further, Harrison's voice rang out across the hangar. Davis, time for your flying lesson. I hope you don't get motion sickness easily. The crowd that had gathered was larger than Rebecca had expected. Word had spread through the base's informal communication network, and dozens of personnel had found excuses to be on the tarmac. Some held up phones, ready to record what they expected to be an amusing spectacle. The Griffin HX-9 sat on the tarmac. Like a resting predator, its sleek lines and hybrid design representing the cutting edge of military aviation technology. Rebecca walked toward it with the confident gait of someone who refused to show fear, even though her heart was beating loud enough to hear over the noise. Her flight suit was a training model, deliberately ill-fitting and stained, as if it had been pulled from the bottom of a warehouse bin. Her helmet was even worse, with a cracked visor and disabled communication system, ensuring she'd be unable to call for help if something went wrong. As Rebecca climbed into the cockpit, the familiar embrace of pilot's seat and controls brought back such a rush of memories that she had to grip the cockpit sides to steady herself. 8 years dissolved in an instant, and she was once again Captain Rebecca Montgomery, climbing into her DEF-22 for the mission that would change everything. The crowd below was tightening. Phones were being raised, voices rising in anticipation. of the show. Harrison's voice cut through the noise with practiced cruelty. Remember, Davis, just sit there and try not to touch anything important. These controls are a bit more complicated than your wrench set. Laughter rippled through the crowd, but Rebecca barely heard it. Her eyes scanned the instrument panel reflexively, noting the differences from the fighter cockpit she'd once commanded, but recognizing the fundamental similarities that united all military aircraft. Her hands hovered over the startup sequence, trembling not with fear, but with the effort of maintaining her disguise. Every switch, every gauge, every control called to her with familiar comfort. The Griffin system sang to her like a favorite song, and for the first time in 8 years, Rebecca felt like she was home. Major Cross, watching from the crowd, saw what the others missed. Davis's hands weren't shaking from nervousness, but from restraint. The way she instinctively adjusted mirrors and seat position, the automatic awareness of cockpit ergonomics, the unconscious knowledge of where everything should be, all indicated experience far beyond that of the average technician. Rebecca's finger hovered over the engine start button as the crowd's jeers faded to white noise. In her breast pocket lay the faded squadron badge, a reminder of the 4 pilots who had trusted her with their lives and paid the ultimate price for Vincent Kruger's betrayal. This was the moment of truth. She could sit passively, let Harrison have his show, and retreat into the safety of anonymity. Or she could honor the dead by showing this crowd what true skill looked like. The choice, when it came, surprised even her. Her 8 years of suppressed training and instincts had never been broken, only buried. As her hand moved toward the controls, Rebecca Davis began to fade, and Captain Rebecca Montgomery began to emerge from the shadows. The crowd was about to learn a lesson they would never forget. The Griffin's engines roared to life with a precision that caught everyone off guard. What should have been a tentative amateur startup attempt instead unfolded with surgical perfection. Every system activated in flawless sequence, the twin turboshaft engine spooling up to operational speed with the smoothness of absolute mastery. Captain Harrison's smirk faded as he watched the startup procedures through the open hangar doors. 47 checklist items completed in 90 seconds, a process that took most pilots 3 full minutes. The expected laughter from the crowd died away, replaced by confused murmurs as they witnessed something that didn't match their expectations. Blackstone Tower, Rebecca's voice came through the radio, clear and professional as she manually activated the CUM system. Griffin. X-Ray 7 requesting engine start clearance. The air traffic controller, a young enlisted man who'd only heard stories of flawless radio procedures, stuttered his response. Griffin, X-Ray 7, you do not have clearance for. Colonel Stone's voice cut in, sharp and alarmed. Switch to command frequency. Who the hell authorized this? Get her out of that aircraft now. But Rebecca had already released the parking brake. The Griffin rolled forward slowly, purposefully. The crowd scattered as the rotors kicked up dust and debris, their phones still recording but the jeers silenced by the undeniable reality unfolding before them. Major Cross watched with professional interest as the Griffin rose into the air with a smoothness that spoke of complete mastery. The aircraft lifted vertically before transitioning to forward flight in one fluid motion, a maneuver requiring perfect coordination of collective, cyclic, and anti-torque controls. My God, one of the technicians whispered. She's actually flying it. Harrison's face cycled through confusion, anger, and something approaching fear. She's going to crash, he told anyone who would listen. Technicians aren't trained for this. Someone has to stop her before she gets killed. But Rebecca had other plans. She took the Griffin into a vertical climb, testing its limits while the crowd below watched in stunned silence. At 5,000 feet, she executed a perfect hammerhead turn, the aircraft rotating on its axis before diving back toward Earth. The recovery from the dive was textbook, pulling out at exactly 1,000 feet with G-forces that would have rendered lesser pilots unconscious. The exercise parameters called for a demonstration of combat search and rescue, find a downed pilot in hostile territory, extract him under fire, and return to base. The current record was 31 minutes, set by Harrison himself the previous year. Rebecca covered the 20 miles to the exercise area in 4 minutes, twice the fastest time ever recorded. The simulated hostile territory spread out below her, a deadly maze of canyons and valleys designed to test pilot navigation and tactical skills. What followed was a masterclass in tactical aviation. She flew the canyon system at 200 feet, using terrain masking to defeat simulated missile locks while maintaining a speed that turned the narrow passages into a blur. Her route followed impossible geometric lines through the air, each maneuver calculated to minimize time under fire while maximizing progress toward the target. In the command bunker, exercise directors stared at their screens in disbelief. The automated air defenses, programmed to simulate enemy anti-aircraft missiles, couldn't maintain lock on Rebecca's Griffin as it danced through their targeting parameters with uncanny precision. "Who the hell is flying that thing?" demanded the exercise controller, a seasoned pilot who'd never seen such maneuvering. Colonel Stone, watching from the command center, felt his career flash before his eyes. "She's a maintenance technician," he said weakly. "She's not even qualified to taxi an aircraft." The distress beacon that would normally take 15 to 20 minutes to locate was found in 3. Rebecca's systematic search pattern covered maximum area with minimal overlap, demonstrating tactical awareness developed in real combat, not training simulations. The simulated extraction under fire pushed pilot and aircraft to their limits. Hovering in a narrow canyon while automated systems fired simulated rounds, Rebecca made continuous micro-adjustments to avoid predetermined kill zones. She executed the sequence flawlessly, her movements anticipating the guidance patterns as if she'd programmed them herself. The return flight was a tour de force of pure speed. The Griffin hurtled across the desert so fast that technicians checked their instruments for malfunctions. 23 minutes from takeoff to touchdown, 8 minutes faster than any recorded time in the exercise's history. Harrison stood motionless on the tarmac, his worldview shattered by 23 minutes of undeniable skill. 500 people watched in silence as the Griffin touched down with the delicacy of a butterfly landing, dead center on the pad from which it had departed. When the engines wound down, Rebecca opened the canopy and stepped out of the aircraft with the same quiet dignity she'd maintained for 8 years. The borrowed flight suit still fit poorly. The cracked helmet was tucked under her arm, as if she'd just completed a routine training flight. She walked through the crowd, which parted before her, heading not toward glory, but toward her tool locker. Major Cross intercepted her halfway across the tarmac. Her face was unreadable. "Davis, that was impossible. Where did you learn to fly?" "Like that?" Rebecca met her gaze steadily. "I didn't learn anything, Major. I was just following the procedures manual." Cross shook her head slowly. "I've been flying for 15 years, and I've never seen maneuvers like that. That's not from a service manual. That's combat experience." Before Rebecca could respond, the air filled with the sound of approaching sirens. A convoy of black SUVs was racing toward the airfield, lights flashing, military police clearing the way. Someone with serious authority was approaching fast, and Rebecca felt a chill of recognition as she saw the 3-star flag on the lead vehicle. The convoy stopped abruptly, and General Thomas Bradley stepped out of the lead SUV. His presence commanded immediate attention. Back straightened, salutes snapped to attention, but his gray eyes found only one person in the crowd. "Captain," he said, his voice carrying like thunder across the silent tarmac. Rebecca stopped, turned, and rendered her first perfect salute in 8 years. "General Bradley, sir." He crossed the distance between them and measured strides, each one heavy with the weight of decades of guilt. When he spoke, his voice carried to every corner of the assembled crowd. "Colonel, do you know who this woman is?" Stone's response was halting and uncertain. "She's a maintenance technician, General. Certified level 2. Bradley interrupted, his voice sharp as a blade. "This is Captain Rebecca Montgomery, sole survivor of Operation Desert Shield. A pilot who endured 72 hours of torture without breaking. An officer who killed 12 enemies and saved 2 wounded servicemen despite her own injuries." The revelation rolled through the crowd like a physical shockwave. The phones that had previously recorded humiliation now recorded transformation. Rebecca stood at attention, her face betraying nothing as her world shifted beneath her feet. General Bradley continued, his voice growing stronger with each word. 8 years ago, Colonel Vincent Kruger betrayed her unit by selling classified intelligence to the enemy. 4 pilots died because of his treachery. Captain Montgomery was framed, tried on fabricated evidence, and stripped of everything she'd earned through blood and sacrifice. Harrison's knees buckled, and he struggled to remain upright against the Griffin's landing gear. Cross backed up, until she hit the hangar wall, her face pale. The crowd stood frozen, absorbing the complete reversal of their understanding. "Kruger confessed 3 years before he died," Bradley declared. "Every charge against Captain Montgomery was fabricated. Every piece of evidence was forged. Every testimony was coerced and bought. She is innocent of everything except trusting the wrong man." The general pulled an envelope from his jacket, emblazoned with official seals. "I have orders from the President for your full reinstatement, Captain. Promotion to Major with back pay for past service. Command of the newest Griffin Squadron. Your choice of duty station." Silence stretched across the tarmac, broken only by the distant hum of patrol jets. All eyes were on Rebecca, waiting for her response to this vindication 8 years in the making. But Rebecca had learned something in the shadows about the difference between redemption and peace, between getting what you deserve and knowing your worth. Her answer would surprise everyone, including herself. The ghost in the mechanic's overalls was about to teach them one final lesson about the true meaning of victory. Rebecca stared at the envelope and General Bradley's outstretched hand for a long moment. Her green eyes reflected the afternoon sun as the crowd pressed closer, cell phones recording every second of this pivotal moment. This was the vindication she dreamed of for 8 years. Full reinstatement, promotion, command of her own squadron. When she finally spoke, her voice carried the quiet strength of someone who had found peace in the deepest valleys of defeat. "Thank you, General, but I don't need this anymore." The refusal sent shocked murmurs through the crowd. She stepped forward and removed her borrowed flight suit, revealing the faded mechanic's overalls beneath. With careful precision, she folded the suit and handed it to Harrison, who was still leaning against the aircraft. "Keep this, Captain," she said quietly. "You'll need it more than I will." Harrison's face had gone white. The arrogance he'd worn like armor was gone, replaced by the hollow look of a man whose foundation had crumbled. He mumbled something unintelligible, unable to meet her gaze. Rebecca turned to address the still rolling cameras and their invisible audience. Skill doesn't depend on rank, gender, or social connections. True worth is measured by character. And character shows in how we treat those we think can't fight back. General Bradley tried again. "Rebecca, please. The Air Force needs pilots like you. The Griffin program needs your expertise. Let us make this right." She smiled, an expression that transformed her weathered features. "You already did, General. You told the truth. That's all I ever wanted." Major Cross pushed through the crowd, her professional composure cracking. "Captain Montgomery, You can't just walk away. You've been vindicated. You could have any command you want. Write your own ticket. What they did to me was 8 years ago, Rebecca replied calmly. What I choose now defines who I am today. I've learned to measure success differently. The crowd parted as she made her way toward her quarters, dignity radiating from every step. Behind her, the entire hierarchy of the base was crumbling. Colonel Stone was already on his phone with Pentagon officials, trying to explain how a disgraced pilot had hidden in plain sight on his base for 8 years. Harrison sat in the dust beside the Griffin, his career effectively over, the video of his humiliation already going viral on social media. But Rebecca was oblivious to the chaos she'd left behind. She was focused on the simple task at hand, gathering her few belongings and preparing for whatever horizon called to her next. As she packed her spare uniforms, Chief Master Sergeant Williams knocked on her container door. His expression mixed admiration with regret. "Captain," he began, then paused. "Rebecca, if I'd known who you really were, you'd treat me with respect even if you thought I was just a mechanic," she interrupted. "That says more about your character than it does about my disguise." Williams studied her with the keen eye of a seasoned, non-commissioned officer who'd seen every type of leader the military produced. "You're really walking away from all that? A promotion, a command, a chance to officially clear your name." Rebecca thought for a moment as she packed her books into a cardboard box. "My name was never really tarnished, Sergeant. The people who mattered, the pilots who flew with me, the ground crews I trusted, the families who knew the truth, they never doubted my integrity. Official vindication is just paperwork." As Rebecca prepared to leave, she made one last gesture that would become legendary among the maintenance personnel at Blackstone Air Force Base. She left 3 things on the small table: a faded squadron badge, now polished by years of handling, a photograph of her younger self next to an F-22, no longer hidden in shame but displayed proudly in a simple frame, and a new letter, written in neat handwriting on blank paper. To the next woman who faces impossible circumstances, it read, "Your worth is not determined by their acceptance. Fly your own way. Arm." Outside, the sun climbed higher, casting short shadows across Blackstone Air Force Base. Amanda Rodriguez, a 23-year-old maintenance trainee who had been watching from the hangar entrance, gathered the courage to enter the abandoned container. Her hand shook as she picked up the badge, feeling its weight, understanding its significance. Through the window, she watched as Rebecca's pickup truck pulled away down the access road, heading toward whatever horizon called to her next. The live stream had ended, but its impact was already spreading. Within hours, the video had racked up millions of views, sparking conversations about prejudice, redemption, and the quiet power of walking away from battles already won. The fallout from Rebecca's demonstration hit Blackstone Air Force Base like a Category 5 hurricane. Within 24 hours, the viral video had garnered more than 3 million views across multiple platforms, with comments pouring in from active and former service members, aviation enthusiasts, and people who recognized injustice when they saw it. Captain Derek Harrison's political connections, once seemingly unshakable, crumbled like a house of cards in a windstorm. The video clearly showed his arrogance and cruelty, his belief that maintenance personnel were beneath him. By noonday next day, his family's congressional allies had distanced themselves from the scandal, and Harrison was called into an emergency meeting with General Bradley. "Explain to me," Bradley said, his voice cold as Montana frost, "how a decorated veteran worked as a maintenance specialist on my aircraft for 8 years, while officers under my command treated her like dirt." Harrison's usual swagger was gone. "Sir, I didn't know she was a former pilot. The recordings show exactly what they show," Bradley interrupted. Captain Montgomery legally changed her identity to protect herself from further persecution. But that doesn't excuse the way you treated someone you thought was just a technician. Colonel Stone, called to the same meeting, looked like a man awaiting his own execution. His career had been built on political maneuvering, and the viral video had exposed the weaknesses in his command structure. "Sir," Stone began hesitantly, "we had no protocols for basic human respect?" Bradley's question cut through Stone's excuse like a sword. "The way your officers treated Montgomery, excuse me, Davis, that's how they treat anyone they consider beneath them. It's a command climate issue, Colonel. That's your responsibility." Major Jennifer Cross, also present at the meeting, remained silent during the confrontation. Unlike Harrison and Stone, she analyzed the situation with the tactical awareness that had made her an effective pilot. She understood that this scandal would reshape careers and reputations across the Air Force. "General," she said carefully, "what can we do to fix this? Beyond formal vindication?" Bradley looked at her approvingly. "That's the right question, Major. Captain Montgomery chose against reinstatement, but the Air Force still owes her. And everyone like her. Real change." The ripple effects were already beginning. Within 48 hours of the video's release, the Air Force Chief of Staff ordered a service-wide review of command climate and listed officer relations. The hashtag #FlyYourWay trended on social media, with thousands sharing stories of workplace discrimination and resilience. Meanwhile, investigative journalists dug into the original court-martial that had destroyed Rebecca's career. Vincent Kruger's confession, sealed in classified files for 3 years, was slowly being declassified under pressure from congressional committees. On Thursday morning, Harrison resigned, issuing a brief statement denying wrongdoing but citing personal reasons for leaving the military. His family's political machine worked overtime to salvage the damage, but public opinion had turned decisively against them. Colonel Stone's fate was sealed when a Pentagon investigation uncovered a pattern of discrimination complaints that had been ignored or covered up during his tenure at Blackstone. He was suspended pending a recommendation for court-martial for conduct on becoming an officer. But perhaps the most significant change came from an unexpected source. General Bradley, haunted by guilt over his failure to protect Rebecca 8 years earlier, announced the creation of the Montgomery Foundation, a nonprofit organization supporting service members who faced retaliation for reporting misconduct. "Too many good people have been destroyed by systems that protect the powerful at the expense of the righteous," Bradley said at a press conference. "The Montgomery Foundation will ensure that no one else goes through what Captain Montgomery endured alone." 2 weeks after the viral video, a congressional hearing took place that would shake the nation. The chairwoman of the committee, Senator Patricia Williams, opened the session with a stern expression that reflected the gravity of the situation. The room was packed with media, military personnel, and members of the public who had been following Rebecca's story with growing outrage. "This committee," Senator Williams announced, "is charged with investigating the systemic failures in military justice that allowed a decorated veteran to be falsely accused, stripped of rank, and forced into exile for 8 years while the real traitor remained free." General Bradley was the first witness, his dress uniform adorned with ribbons from 3 decades of service. His testimony was precise and devastating, methodically documenting how Vincent Kruger's network of corrupt officers had manufactured evidence and suppressed investigation. Kruger did not act alone, Bradley testified, his voice carrying throughout the packed room. He had accomplices at every level of command, officers who traded integrity for career advancement, who sold their souls for security. The committee had received Kruger's full deathbed confession 3 years ago, the document finally declassified under congressional pressure. It revealed the extent of his betrayal, intelligence sold to enemy forces, mission plans leaked too. Hostile governments, a web of corruption that had cost American lives for over a decade. Captain Montgomery was selected as a scapegoat, Bradley continued, because she was competent enough to be believably portrayed as a reckless commander, but isolated enough to be eliminated without significant resistance. She was a woman in a man's profession, an outsider without the political connections to fight back effectively. Representative James Morrison, the committee's ranking member, leaned forward with barely contained anger. "General, you're telling this committee that an innocent officer was deliberately framed to protect a traitor." "That's exactly what I'm telling you, Congressman," Bradley replied. "And the officers involved in that frame-up still hold positions of authority throughout the military." The second day of hearings featured pilots who had served with Rebecca before her downfall. Lieutenant Colonel David Kim, one of the few survivors from her original squadron, gave devastating testimony about her competence and character. "Captain Montgomery was the finest pilot I ever flew with," Kim testified, his voice trembling with emotion. "She saved my life twice in combat, making decisions under pressure that other pilots couldn't even comprehend. The idea that she would recklessly endanger her squadron is not only false, it's impossible." Master Sergeant Williams, Rebecca's former supervisor at Blackstone, spoke of her years in maintenance, describing a woman of exceptional competence who endured daily indignities with quiet dignity. "She knew those aircraft better than the pilots who flew them," Williams said. "She could diagnose problems just by listening to engine sounds and understood complex systems that baffled engineers with PhDs. We called her the professor," he added, "and now I understand why. She wasn't studying, she was remembering." The most dramatic moment of the hearing came when Derek Harrison was called to the stand. Stripped of rank and facing possible criminal charges, he looked broken, his former arrogance replaced by the hollow stare of a man whose worldview had collapsed. Under Senator Williams's aggressive questioning, Harrison admitted to years of discriminatory behavior directed not just at Rebecca, but at enlisted personnel throughout his career. "You systematically treated people you considered inferior with deliberate cruelty throughout your career," Senator Williams said coldly. "And when someone demonstrated skill superior to yours, your response was to publicly humiliate them." Harrison's voice was barely audible. "I was wrong. I was taught that maintaining distance from enlisted ranks was essential to leadership. I went too far." "You went beyond leadership to willful cruelty," the senator corrected. "Video evidence shows you took pleasure in humiliating someone you believed incapable of fighting back." The committee's final witness was Rebecca herself, appearing unexpectedly via video link from an undisclosed location. She had agreed to testify only at General Bradley's personal request, and her appearance sent a wave of anticipation through the hearing room. "Captain Montgomery," Senator Williams began, "you endured 8 years of exile for crimes you did not commit. Tell this committee, in your own words, how that injustice affected you." Rebecca appeared composed, her voice steady. "Senator, the false accusations and court-martial were devastating, but not for the reasons people might expect. The loss of rank and wings was painful, but the deepest wound was the loss of trust in the institution to which I dedicated my life." She paused, choosing her words carefully. 8 years ago, I believed that competence and integrity would always be rewarded. That truth would triumph over politics. To learn that officers I trusted could sacrifice honor for advancement was more devastating than any physical torture I endured as a prisoner of war. Representative Morrison asked the question everyone was thinking. "Captain, General Bradley testified that the Air Force is prepared to reinstate you, provide back pay, and offer you command of any unit you choose. Will you accept these offers?" Rebecca's smile was sad but resolute. "Congressman, I appreciate the gesture, but I've learned to measure success differently. I don't need official validation to know my worth. The real victory isn't in my reinstatement. It's in ensuring this never happens to anyone else. Her testimony lasted 2 hours. Rebecca answered every question with the precision of someone who had spent 8 years analyzing every detail of her downfall. She spoke of systemic problems in military culture, the importance of protecting whistleblowers, and the need for true accountability at all levels of command. At the hearing's conclusion, Senator Williams announced that the committee was recommending sweeping military justice reforms, including independent oversight of courts-martial and stronger protections for whistleblowers. But the most significant outcome was something that couldn't be codified in law: a fundamental shift in military attitude toward integrity, competence, and the treatment of those without political protection. 6 months after the congressional hearing, Rebecca stood on a windswept plateau in Montana, watching the sunrise paint the Rocky Mountains in shades of gold and crimson. The small airfield below bustled with early morning activity: student pilots preparing for training flights, mechanics conducting pre-flight inspections, instructors discussing flight plans with nervous newcomers. Montgomery Flight Academy had exceeded her wildest expectations. What had started as a simple flight school for military veterans had evolved into something far more significant: a place where competence mattered more than connections, where skill was valued over politics, where people written off by others could discover their true potential. Rebecca's phone buzzed with a message from Amanda Rodriguez, the young woman who had found her letter at Blackstone. Amanda was now the Academy's chief maintenance instructor, parlaying her experience into an opportunity to teach others that technical expertise deserved the same respect as any other skill. Graduation ceremony this afternoon. 23 new pilots, including 5 who were told by traditional programs they weren't pilot material. The message read, "You should be proud." Rebecca smiled, pocketing her phone. The Academy's success wasn't measured in profits or political influence, but in the quiet satisfaction of watching people exceed expectations. Former enlisted personnel who had been dismissed as mere mechanics were now flying commercial aircraft. Women who had been told they didn't have what it takes were breaking barriers in aviation careers. The Academy had become a magnet for those who didn't fit traditional molds. Veterans with PTSD found purpose in flight safety training. Former military officers forced out for whistleblowing discovered new careers in aviation instruction. Rebecca had created what the traditional military couldn't: a true meritocracy. General Bradley visited the Academy regularly, using his influence to refer qualified candidates and help secure contracts for pilot training programs. The foundation established in Rebecca's honor had grown into a powerful force for military justice reform, with offices in 12 cities and a legal team defending whistleblowers. Blackstone's viral video had faded from social media feeds, but its influence continued rippling through military culture. The hashtag #FlyYourWay had become a rallying cry for those facing discrimination and injustice, a reminder that true victory sometimes meant walking away from systems designed to humiliate you. Derek Harrison had been court-martialed and dishonorably discharged. His family's political connections withered under the weight of public outrage. Now he worked at a car dealership, his military career a cautionary tale told in leadership seminars. Colonel Stone faced similar consequences, stripped of rank and pension for his role in creating a discriminatory command climate. The Pentagon used his case as a textbook example of failed leadership, implementing new training programs that emphasized inclusive leadership and ethical decision-making. But for Rebecca, the most significant change was personal. She had learned to forgive, not because those who wronged her deserved it, but because anger was too heavy, a burden to carry when you were trying to fly. As she prepared for her first lesson of the day, Rebecca reflected on the journey that had brought her here. 8 years of exile had taught her that identity couldn't be stolen by others, that competence spoke louder than rank, and that integrity was its own reward. The student arriving for class was a former Army mechanic named Carlos Martinez, who had been rejected by 3 different flight schools for lacking aptitude for aviation. Rebecca had reviewed his application personally, seeing something familiar in his story, the quiet determination of someone who refused to accept others' limitations. "Ready for your first solo flight, Carlos?" she asked as they walked toward the training aircraft. His smile was infectious. "Ma'am, I've been ready for this my whole life. It just took a while to find the right place to prove it." As Rebecca climbed into the cockpit, she felt a familiar sense of peace, the knowledge that she was exactly where she belonged. The instrument panel before her wasn't the cutting-edge technology of a Griffin HX-9, but it represented something more valuable: opportunity without prejudice, advancement based on merit, respect earned through competence rather than connections. "Remember," she told Carlos as he ran through the pre-flight checklist, "flying isn't about impressing anyone. It's about understanding that the sky doesn't care about your background, your gender, or your social status. It cares only about your skill and your courage." The engine roared to life, and Carlos's hands moved confidently over the controls. Rebecca watched with the satisfaction of a teacher seeing potential become reality, remembering her own first solo flight decades ago. As the aircraft lifted off the runway, climbing into the vast Montana sky, Rebecca knew she had found something more valuable than vindication or revenge. She had found purpose, peace, and the freedom that comes with defining success on your own terms. The ghost in the mechanic's uniform was gone forever, replaced by someone who understood that true flight was more than just leaving the ground. It was rising above the limitations others tried to impose, navigating by the stars of your own integrity, and landing safely with the knowledge that competence, courage, and character were the only ranks that truly mattered. 1 year later, Rebecca stood at the podium of the Air Force Academy's graduation ceremony as the keynote speaker. The invitation had come from General Bradley, who now served as superintendent. The irony wasn't lost on her. The institution that had once destroyed her was now asking her to inspire its newest officers. "Cadets," she began, her voice carrying across the sea of young faces. "Today you receive your wings and your commissions. But the true test of your character won't come in the cockpit. It will come in how you treat the person standing next to you when you think no one is watching." In the audience, Amanda Rodriguez sat in the front row, now a lieutenant after completing her degree through the Montgomery Foundation Scholarship Program. Beside her sat Carlos Martinez, who had just been hired as a commercial pilot for a major airline. Master Sergeant Williams, recently promoted to Chief Master Sergeant, beamed with pride from the VIP section. Rebecca's speech was simple but powerful. She spoke of integrity over politics, competence over connections, and the courage to stand up for what's right even when it costs everything. She didn't mention her own story. By now, everyone knew it. "The uniform you wear represents something larger than yourself," she continued. "It represents the trust of the American people, the sacrifice of those who came before, and the hopes of those who will follow. Don't let politics or personal ambition corrupt that trust." After the ceremony, Rebecca walked through the academy grounds she hadn't seen in over a decade. The buildings were the same, but something fundamental had changed. She overheard conversations between cadets that would have been impossible during her time. Open discussions about reporting misconduct, about supporting teammates regardless of background, about measuring success by integrity rather than advancement. General Bradley joined her on the walk. "You know," he said quietly, "applications to the academy are up 30% this year. Your story changed how young people view military service." Rebecca nodded. "That's good. But the real change is in the culture. These cadets understand that leadership isn't about rank, it's about character. The Montgomery Foundation had processed over 2,000 cases in its first year, providing legal support for service members facing retaliation. The congressional reforms had created independent oversight of military justice, and cases like Rebecca's were becoming increasingly difficult to pursue. Derek Harrison's downfall had become a case study in military ethics courses. His name was synonymous with the toxic leadership the military was working to eliminate. Several officers from Kruger's original network had been identified and quietly forced to retire, their corruption finally catching up with them. But perhaps the most significant change was happening at places like Montgomery Flight Academy, which had expanded to 3 locations. Rebecca's approach, evaluating people based on ability rather than pedigree, was being adopted by training programs across the country. The Academy's latest graduating class included Sarah Chun, a former Navy cook who was now qualified to fly commercial aircraft; Marcus Thompson, a former Army truck driver who had discovered a natural talent for precision flying; and Jennifer Walsh, a maintenance specialist who had been told she didn't have the temperament for pilot training. Each graduate carried forward Rebecca's core message: excellence has nothing to do with where you start and everything to do with how hard you're willing to work. As the sun set over the Academy grounds, Rebecca reflected on the unexpected path her life had taken. 8 years ago, she had been broken by betrayal and injustice. Today, she was helping reshape an entire institution. Her phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. "Captain Montgomery, my name is Lisa Patterson. I'm a maintenance technician at Dover Air Force Base. My commanding officer has been treating enlisted personnel inappropriately. And after seeing your story, I found the courage to report it. The Montgomery Foundation is helping with my case. Thank you for showing us that standing up for what's right is worth the risk." Messages like this arrived daily now. Rebecca had become a symbol not just of redemption, but of the power of refusing to let others define your worth. That evening, at a quiet dinner with General Bradley and his wife, Bradley raised his glass to Captain Rebecca Montgomery. He said, who reminded us that honor isn't about the rank on your collar. It's about the principles in your heart. Rebecca smiled, raising her own glass. To everyone who refuses to stay silent when they witness injustice. Real change happens one person at a time. As she drove back to her hotel that night, Rebecca thought about the 4 pilots who had died under her command. Marcus Torres's letter still sat in her wallet, a reminder of the trust they had placed in her. She had spent 8 years feeling like she had failed them. Now she understood that the best way to honor their memory was to ensure that future military leaders understood the true meaning of service. The next morning, Rebecca returned to Montana and her flight academy, but she carried with her the knowledge that the ripples of her story would continue spreading, inspiring others to stand up for what's right, to measure success by character rather than rank, and to understand that sometimes the greatest victory is simply refusing to let others determine your worth. The ghost in the mechanic's uniform had become something far more powerful, a reminder that integrity, competence, and courage could triumph over corruption, politics, and prejudice. And in training rooms and briefing halls across the military, young officers were learning that true leadership meant lifting others up, not keeping them down. Rebecca's story had ended where it began, in the sky. But now, instead of flying alone, she was teaching others to soar. And that, she realized, was a victory worth more than any rank or medal the military could have offered. The sky, after all, had room for everyone brave enough to reach for it. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and become a part of our Everyday Life Stories community. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment below. We love hearing from our amazing viewers around the world. Rebecca's journey reminds us that sometimes the greatest victories come not from proving others wrong, but from staying true to yourself. What would you have done in her situation? Let us know in the comments below. If you believe that everyone deserves respect regardless of their position, give this story a like and share it with someone who needs to hear this message today.